You could build an empire, Quinn, but to this family, you'll always be the daughter born the wrong gender. This should never be a sentence spoken by anyone. Not by family, not by society, not by tradition. Because each of us has the right to rise. Not to beg for a seat, but to build the entire room ourselves. And sometimes, the deepest form of revenge is to shine exactly where they once tried to bury you in silence. Stay, because this is only the beginning. The metal chair screeched against the concrete floor as I tried to adjust it without catching my dress in a rusted bolt. The hem of my navy blue gown, custom tailored, grazed a puddle I didn't dare sniff too closely. Fluorescent lighting buzzed overhead like an insect too stubborn to die, and the smell of industrial cleaner clung to the walls like shame. Somewhere far away, laughter rang out, the kind of polished, empty laughter that filled rooms lined with champagne flutes and forced smiles. I'd promised myself I wouldn't care anymore. But as I stared at the name tags on the main table, I knew. This wasn't an accident. The card that read Quinn Waverly had a thick black line slashed through it like I'd died and no one told me. In its place, an ornate calligraphy card now bore the name of someone I didn't recognize. Some cousin from their investment arm, probably. I hadn't even known there was a cousin named Gregory. Daniel's hand hovered at my lower back, steadying. He said nothing, but I could see the storm behind his silence. "I'm fine," I whispered. "Let them." His jaw clenched. "They seated you in the staff overflow. Storage room, Quinn." "I noticed," I said, plastering on a smile as a passing guest glanced our way. "This will be useful later." The waitress had been apologetic. Young, probably new, her cheeks burning red as she'd stammered, "This way, Miss Waverly. I think the family requested." "It's all right," I had said, voice calm. Always calm. Especially when it wasn't. Now, in the shadow of Langford Estate's grand ballroom, I sat in a room meant for broken furniture and unopened crates of cheap wine. The chandelier in the hall had sparkled as we entered, casting golden light over manicured hands and diamond cufflinks. Here, my company was a mop handle and a forgotten Santa decoration with one eye missing. Daniel crouched beside me, inspecting the door. "No handle on the inside." "Of course not," I muttered. "Wouldn't want the spare linens escaping." He straightened, his blue eyes searching mine. "You don't have to do this. We can leave now." "And miss the cake cutting?" I smirked, though my throat ached. I want to see how this plays out." The door creaked open again. Brittany floated in on a cloud of tulle and glitter, all smiles and Botox. "Oh, you made it. I thought you might prefer somewhere quiet, given how busy the main hall is." I tilted my head. "This is definitely quiet." "Right?" she chirped. "Anyway, Ethan's just overwhelmed. Weddings, you know? Stressful." She leaned in conspiratorially. "I told him you might be more comfortable here. He didn't want to, well, you know. You've always preferred low-key." I stared at her, savoring the performance. "You're such a thoughtful bride." She beamed, clearly missing the ice beneath my words. "Enjoy the evening." And then she was gone. I pulled out my phone, adjusted the lens, and clicked record. The screen framed me in low lighting. Smudged mascara, serene expression, like a documentary subject who'd just learned the Earth was about to implode. "Remember this," I murmured to myself. I set the phone against an overturned crate, angling it toward the door. Just enough to catch me. The empty chair, and the corner where Brittany had stood. The screen lit up as a new message arrived. "Julia Rivera. Langford Group wants confirmation on contract terms. Need your approval by tonight." I stared at the screen. My finger hovered over the reply button, a smile forming. Sharp. Deliberate. "Oh, you'll get your answer. Just not the one you're expecting." When they looked at me, they didn't see Quinn Waverly, CEO of a top 10 tech firm. They saw the daughter who never listens. Champagne flutes clinked like wind chimes across the Langford Estate's Grand Hall as a jazz trio played a version of At Last that sounded slightly too upbeat for the lyrics. I stood near the edge of the crowd, just beside a floral column, watching faces shimmer under crystal chandeliers. I didn't belong here. Not really. But I knew how to play the part. Smile faintly, nod politely, listen without hearing. Brittany swayed toward me, glittering in sequins and satisfaction. Her tone was light, too light. Gregory handpicked every table, she said with an air of casual brilliance. He wanted the press up front. The seating chart took days. Oh? I asked, eyes still scanning the room. She nodded, brushing a blonde strand behind her ear like a debutante on a reality show. We had to be strategic, you know? Media relations and all that. Besides, she let her voice drop into a whisper. You've always said you don't like being the center of attention, right? That wasn't what I said. I'd said I don't like being a puppet. Ethan arrived then, loosening his collar, looking like he wanted to vanish into the walls. I didn't think it would matter to you, he muttered, avoiding my eyes. You're always so independent. You didn't think it would matter, I repeated, tilting my head. Ethan, I'm your only sister. He sighed, glanced at Brittany, then at the dance floor, then down at his cufflinks. It wasn't my decision. Of course not. I smiled, my gaze sweeping over the elegant mess of our family. Margaret laughing with the Langfords like she hadn't just erased me from her legacy. Charles locking arms with business associates who only cared about last names and inheritance structures. They had forgotten who I was. They remembered the girl who used to fight at dinner tables, who skipped debutante season and crashed tech conventions instead. They remembered what I was before the IPO, before the market listing, before Nexus Tech sat on the Fortune 500. But they hadn't updated their memory. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I glanced down. Julia Rivera, Langford Group's reps, will leave Charleston by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Need confirmation tonight, per clause 7B. I exhaled slowly. Brittany chattered on about monogrammed dessert plates and imported lavender. I let her voice drift to background noise. Daniel stood on the far end of the room, a quiet guardian watching the entire exchange. He didn't approach. He knew this was mine to handle. Excuse me, I said, brushing past Ethan, who looked like he wanted to speak but hadn't found the courage, or the spine. Outside, the night air wrapped around me, scented faintly of gardenias and wood smoke. Daniel followed, unlocking the car with a subtle click. I'll drive, he said. You look like you need to type angry things. I smiled tightly. You're not wrong. Settled in the passenger seat, I opened my laptop and pulled up the file. The video from the storage room played on loop, capturing the mop bucket, the peeling paint, my carefully controlled fury. How much humiliation, I whispered, is enough to count as leverage? Because that's what it was now. Currency. Not just offense. Not just injury. Evidence. My phone buzzed again. Julia Rivera. Do we proceed or stall? I stared at the blinking cursor in the message box, then typed, Tell them we'll be sending a final decision, after the cake is cut. And then I hit send. The second the knife sliced into the wedding cake, I knew it was time to cut something else. A polite burst of applause erupted as Ethan and Brittany posed, her perfectly manicured hand guiding his through 3 layers of sugar and ego. The cameras clicked in rhythm. Everything gleamed. Her smile, the frosting, even the silver cake stand polished to a mirror shine. The crowd cooed, drunken, and delighted. They had no idea what was coming. You don't need revenge, Daniel had said on the way here, his voice low. But you do deserve clarity. This was my version of both. The chandeliers glowed warmer now, casting golden light over people who pretended to like each other more the later it got. Champagne splashed freely. Somewhere behind me, a violinist played something classical and utterly forgettable. Gregory Langford took the stage with the confidence of a man who had never been told no in his life. He raised a glass. Tonight, we don't just celebrate the union of two families. We also celebrate the beginning of a historic partnership between Langford Holdings and Nexus Technologies. A murmur of polite interest rippled across the crowd. Together, Gregory continued, we will redefine the future of integrated AI infrastructure across the East Coast and beyond. I stepped out from behind the curtain at the edge of the ballroom. He paused. Soft clicks of cameras shifting focus followed me as I walked slowly, deliberately toward the microphone. My heels didn't echo. They landed like punctuation marks. Ethan's eyes widened. Brittany froze, cake knife still in hand. Daniel remained at the corner of the stage, expression unreadable. He didn't need to stop me. He'd known I was past the point of doubt. I reached the microphone, adjusted it slightly. On behalf of Nexus Tech? My voice rang clear. We hereby withdraw from all negotiations. The silence was absolute. Gregory lowered his glass an inch. This is a joke, right? He asked, half laughing, scanning the room for anyone who might agree. A giant screen behind the stage flickered on. Julia Rivera's face appeared, crisply lit in her San Francisco office. She didn't smile. This is official, she said. Phones rose in unison like an army of periscopes. VIPs began whispering behind raised hands. One reporter mouthed, "Oh my God," as he started recording. The hashtag probably wrote itself. Brittany looked around as if seeking someone to blame. Ethan stood rooted, pale and unblinking. Gregory stepped forward, voice sharp. You realize what you're doing? Yes, I said. I reached into the pocket of my gown and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Printed, signed, time-stamped. I read aloud. Due to reputational conflicts and structural misalignment, Nexus Technologies is terminating all pending partnerships with Langford Holdings, effective immediately. All prior agreements shall be considered null and void under Clause 11B. Gasps fluttered across the room. Somewhere, a champagne glass shattered on the floor. My father's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Margaret didn't look at me. She looked at Gregory, like checking if the deal could still be salvaged. I handed the paper to the nearest videographer. Distribute widely, I said before stepping down. I passed Brittany, who stared through me like I was a ghost. Ethan opened his mouth, but there were no words that could stand upright in this moment. He had made his choice days ago. At the ballroom's edge, Daniel waited. He didn't smile. He simply reached for my hand as I passed. They wanted me out of the room, I whispered to him. Now I've taken the whole house with me. ChatGPT John Noy. It took them less than 2 hours to go from smug to scrambling. By sunrise, the video had already passed 2 million views. Hashtag #storage room CEO. Thumbnail, me, perfectly lit by accident, sitting beside a mop bucket in silk and fury. Someone had added dramatic piano music and cut to Gregory Langford's frozen face just as Julia declared the withdrawal official. Daniel showed me a meme. They gave you a folding chair, it read, so she folded the whole deal. I didn't laugh, but I didn't stop him from showing me another. At Nexus Tech's downtown office, the air was electric. Julia stood by the screen in the war room, hands clasped behind her back, the model of composed satisfaction. We're up 4%, she reported. The Langfords, on the other hand? She clicked to a screen of financial data. Langford Holdings had shed nearly 8% in early trading. Headlines crawled beneath the tickers. She was humiliated. Then she pulled the plug on $30 million. From storage room to boardroom, how Quinn Waverly turned an insult into leverage Langford scandal. Deepens, inside the deal that went viral. Brittany had tried calling 3 times before 8 a.m. I let everyone ring out. Her last voicemail was breathless. This is all a misunderstanding. We need to talk. Gregory's under pressure. Not my concern anymore. Julia slid a press report across the table. Conference organizers have dropped Brittany from the keynote roster, she said, eyes sharp. Branding integrity clause. They didn't like the storage room footage. Imagine that, I murmured. A cutaway report from Bloomberg rolled on silent behind us. Gregory walking briskly into Langford's Manhattan headquarters, a circle of grim-faced investors in his wake. Captions scrolled, "We demand transparency and accountability." Langford execs allegedly knew of seating arrangement before event. I leaned back in my chair, watching the building I once feared crumble on national television. "With you out of the picture, everything finally feels balanced," Brittany had said just a day earlier, smirking behind a flute of Prosecco. I suppose balance feels different when you're the one left standing. Julia turned toward me. "You want to issue a statement?" "No," I said. "Let them spin. Every time they speak, they dig deeper." She nodded once, approving. Then her phone buzzed. She stepped aside. Daniel appeared in the doorway, coffee in hand. "Press wants a sit-down. I told them no interviews unless you approve." "Not yet," I said. "This isn't about them." He handed me the mug. "Then what is it about?" "Correction," I said quietly. "And memory." My phone buzzed again. "Unknown number?" I nearly declined, until I saw the name in the preview. Aunt Diana. I hesitated, then answered. Her voice was clear, measured. "You're not the first woman they tried to erase." My grip tightened on the cup. "I've been waiting," she continued. "It's time someone cracked the Langford legacy open. You have no idea how far this goes." I signed away my inheritance for silence. Don't make the same mistake. Aunt Diana's penthouse in Asheville was nothing like the Langford estate. No chandeliers, no marble floors, just honey-colored wood, antique shelves bowed under the weight of books, and wide windows looking out toward the lake, silver and still beneath a clouded morning. It was the kind of place where time felt honest. She poured the tea herself. No staff, no ceremony, just 2 porcelain cups, mismatched. She didn't speak for a moment, letting me absorb the quiet. I hadn't seen her since the wedding. No, since I walked away from that miserable table and caught her watching me with something between pity and pride. She spoke at last. "I was 29 when I learned how little I mattered." I looked up. "Your grandfather, our charming patriarch, had 2 daughters, but only 1 son. Guess who got the company?" I didn't answer. "I built Langford's Boston division," she continued. "Tripled our numbers in 5 years, but when I asked to join the board, I was told to consider stepping aside gracefully." She stood, walked to a cabinet, pulled out a manila folder yellowed at the edges. "They said I could keep my reputation, that I could leave quietly. All I had to do was sign this." She unfolded the papers, scanned, faded, still heavy. The clause was there in bold, underlined once. "Signatory agrees to waive all claims to Langford Holdings and remain publicly silent on internal family matters in perpetuity." I stared at the signature line. Her name, Diana L. Langford, was fluid and resigned. "I signed for peace," she said softly. "I thought maybe it would keep the rest of the family intact." She pulled a second page from the file, older, handwritten in blue ink. Her fingers trembled only slightly. It was tucked in my mother's desk drawer. "Read it." I took the page. It was her mother's script. My grandmother's. "Never let women believe they belong at the table. It makes the fall crueler." I blinked, reading it again. "I was angry when I found it," Diana said. Then I realized she wasn't bitter. She was warning me. Maybe warning you too. I sat back, trying to fit it all together. My exile to the storage room, the mockery wrapped in lace and Prosecco, the frozen look on my mother's face when Gregory's deal collapsed. This wasn't just insult. It was architecture. Generational. "They never planned to make space for you," Diana said. "They just hoped you wouldn't ask." "I didn't lose my seat at the table," I said, the words surprising even me. "I was building my own." She smiled, slow, real. Then reached into the folder and pulled one last thing. A photocopy of the original will. a page that should have been shredded decades ago, where Diana's name still appeared beside voting shares and advisory rights. "I've kept it," she said, "in case someone like you came along." I held it like a weapon and a relic. "You'll need this, not just for leverage, for truth." Outside, the lake reflected the thick gray sky. Clouds moved slowly across the water, mirroring something in my chest. Something shifting, widening. I rose and walked to the window. The mountains stood firm behind the trees, and the lake curled like a silver question mark. It's time I built a bigger table. This time, no one told me where to sit. I designed the whole damn room. The ballroom at the Vervan, Manhattan's most sought-after five-star venue, gleamed like it knew history was being made. Sunlight cut through the high glass windows, pouring over a long wooden table, custom-built, wide and bright, not a single head in sight. 12 chairs, evenly spaced, no velvet ropes, no name tag scratched out, no shadows. Julia stood beside me backstage, clipboard in hand, headset tucked behind one ear. "We've got over 2,000 watching online, more filing in every minute. And every seat here," she added, nodding to the women taking their places, founders, builders, engineers, creators. Earned, not inherited. Daniel approached from the side, a quiet steadiness in his eyes. He didn't have to say it. "This is yours." I stepped forward. The lights dimmed, then brightened, and I spoke. "We don't fix broken tables," I said clearly into the mic. "We build new ones." The crowd didn't cheer. They rose. A wave of silent agreement, a thrum of recognition, of women seeing themselves, finally, in every plank of that table. We moved into discussions. Real ones. Funding parity? Boardroom design? Structural equity. Not slogans, but strategies. Not panelists, but equals. Halfway through, I caught sight of them. At the far glass entrance, behind the velvet line, Brittany. My mother. They had an RSVPD. They weren't on the guest list. And now, they were on the outside. Watching through the transparent walls they once insisted didn't exist. Security held the line. Brittany said something. Insistent. My mother didn't speak. Just stood there, her face unreadable. Daniel leaned in and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "They're watching," he said, voice low. "But you're leading." I nodded once and turned back to the woman seated across from me. A young founder from Atlanta whose voice trembled just slightly when she asked, "How did you know when to walk away?" The room fell still. "When staying meant betraying myself," I replied. No one clapped. They didn't need to. Some truths land deeper than applause. And then, as the cameras panned, as Julia gave the signal, as the final beam of light swept across the polished table I had made real from a storage room memory, I looked directly into the lens. I smiled. "Oh, and if anyone asks where I'm seated now?" I paused. Let the silence stretch like silk. "Tell them I built the building." What began with a name crossed out on a seating chart became a spotlight no one could dim. The humiliation Quinn endured was not an isolated cruelty, but a symptom of a legacy. One that taught women their value was conditional, their presence negotiable. But rather than crumble in silence, she chose visibility. Not just for herself, but for every voice that had once been forced into the shadows of family honor or corporate diplomacy. Her response wasn't loud. It was exacting, strategic, and impossible to ignore. In a world where injustice often hides behind tradition and polished smiles, Quinn proved that dignity doesn't beg for recognition. It commands it. Her silence was never weakness. It was gathering strength. And when the moment came, she didn't return fire with fire. She redesigned the battlefield. The cost was high. Ties severed, histories uncovered, illusions shattered. But in reclaiming her story, she gave others the blueprint to do the same. True justice rarely comes dressed as vengeance. It comes when courage outlasts cruelty, and truth walks through doors built by those once locked out. Perhaps that's the real legacy. Not revenge, but reconstruction. Because no wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to sit down at a broken table and build your own instead. If this story stirred something in you, don't let it end here. Tap like, hit subscribe, and step into a library of stories just like this, where silence is broken, legacies are reclaimed, and every woman learns she was never asking for too much, only asking in the wrong room. This isn't just Quinn's story, it's a reminder. The seat was never the prize. The power was always in building the table. You didn't build a life here, Tessa. You were just convenient. Until you weren't. Those were my father's words, spoken during my 30th birthday dinner, while I was still holding a $9 vanilla cake that never got its candles lit. No celebration, just an eviction notice dressed up as growth. If you've ever been treated like a convenience, used, drained, then discarded by your own family, stay. Because this story isn't just mine. It speaks for everyone who's ever been pushed out of the very place they once called home. The house looked the same as always. Beige siding, porch light still flickering like it had been for 2 winters. Familiar, and yet I stood at the threshold like a stranger holding a peace offering wrapped in grocery plastic. I pushed the door open. No one came to greet me. From the kitchen, the heavy scent of pot roast wafted out. Mom's special, though it didn't smell like it was made for me. I slipped past the living room, slid the cake behind the fruit bowl on the counter. I didn't want it to be a spectacle. Just a slice, maybe. A nod to 30 years of breathing. Dad sat at the head of the table, reading something on his tablet. His wireframe glasses caught the light like armor. Mom was already seated, spooning carrots onto a plate. The silence wasn't new. But tonight it held a different shape. Sharp. Heavy. "Dinner's hot," she said, still not looking up. I nodded, took my seat across from them. My chair creaked louder than expected. Dad cleared his throat. We passed the dishes like strangers in a waiting room. I didn't mention the cake. I waited for someone to say happy birthday, or at least acknowledge the date. But the only sound was the knife sawing through roast, like it was cutting something else entirely. Then Dad set his fork down. "We've talked, and we think it's time you found your own place. End of the month." It landed like a punch with no warning. I blinked. "What?" "You're 30, Tessa," he said flatly. "It's overdue." I looked at Mom. She didn't flinch, just stared at her plate like the peas had answers. Her cardigan sleeve brushed the edge of her wine glass as she reached for more carrots. "I've been helping with bills. Groceries. My voice cracked. "I pay more than half of everything here." Dad wiped his mouth with a napkin. "We've been more than generous." I stared at him, heart thudding in my chest. More than generous? The man who made me show my bank app every month just to prove I hadn't spent too much on lattes? The man who let me cover electric, water, car insurance and still told the neighbors I was finding my path? Mom finally spoke. "It's good for you, sweetie. Independence." Independence? From what? My own roof? I nodded slowly, not trusting my mouth to move without screaming. I stood up, carefully lifting my napkin and placing it on the table. My hands were shaking. "Excuse me," I said. My voice sounded foreign. I walked up the stairs, each step a closing door. At the top, I paused, just for a second, then turned left toward my childhood bedroom. The calendar on my door still showed February. I hadn't bothered changing it. Inside, everything looked the same. The fading lilac walls, the bookshelf with books I hadn't opened in years. The air was still. I moved toward the closet. I opened the door and knelt. The panel at the back felt familiar under my fingers. A small groove, invisible unless you knew it was there. I pressed it gently. Click! The panel slid open. Inside were the manila folders. Stacked, labeled, sealed like memories in a vault. 6 years of rent payments, receipts, bank transfers, emails. Every single